So the title of this talk is Bearing Witness to the Singularity. And first, I think what we have to do is talk about what exactly the singularity is. Singularity was coined in 1958 by John von Neumann. And basically what it is it is a moment in the future beyond which we can't look, like we can't see. We can't really predict what's going to happen. We can, and the reason we can't predict what's going to happen is because we have no frame of reference for understanding how society and our lives are going to change. There have been numerous singularities throughout human history. There was the invention of fire. There was agriculture, the Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Revolution, Information Age. Each of these moments, as soon as we walked up and entered into those phases of human existence, life for people changed irrevocably. We are still in the Bronze Age. We're still in the Iron Age. We're still in the agricultural age. These things never stopped. They just became a foundation for something else. When the first time that people noticed that certain rocks around very hot fires had some weird shiny stuff bubble out that hardened, that was the beginnings of discovery that led to metalsmithing. And somebody had the brilliant idea that, well, if tin and copper can come out of these rocks when they're around a fire that's very hot, how hot would it need to be to make something else come out? Is there anything that we can get out of these rocks if we make it super hot? Now, ancient blast furnaces required the builder to build a kiln and to blow hot air and put coal into the kiln for 12 hours before it would melt the ore enough to actually have what's called a bloom. And this is a bloom. It's basically the first phase of the iron melting out of the rock. From here, the first bloom could then be hammered and be beaten into whatever shapes it was going to be used for. But this bloom represents the first the first risk taker trying something out and getting something completely unexpected that changed all of human history. And we are encountering, we are now looking at the blooms of the singularity for us. I'm going to make this talk without burning any NDAs in the process, but rest assured that the few companies that I'm going to mention are just the tip of the iceberg. There are a ton of companies that are in stealth mode right now and that are constantly coming out of stealth mode, making big announcements. And also, I want to point out that my perspective is not a complete one. I don't know everything about what's going on in AI. To be honest, it's kind of a baffling subject to begin with. So, it's even possible that some of my conceptions are incorrect. But I promise you, I did my best to do my research so that I would give you good information. So the first part I want to talk about is oncology, because it's the second greatest killer of people in North America after heart disease. And specifically, I want to talk about cancer diagnosis, because identifying the cancer early, identifying what types of cancer it is and what its genetic profile is, are key to having a successful outcome. So the first group I want to talk about is called CellWorks. These are a client of ours, of Microverse Studios. They have essentially, we could call it a simulated cell. They took huge numbers of pathways within the cell and how they're governed by very specific genes. And they can actually calculate how different drugs are going to impact those pathways. And so what they can do is they can take a patient's genome, or from their tumor, the tumor genome, and they can run a simulated drug through these pathways and identify with a high degree of accuracy how well that drug is going to work. And what this does is it sidesteps the first phase of cancer therapy, which is where the oncologist looks at what type of cancer it is and then makes their best guess based on of what medicine should be based on their own experience when they've seen people with cancer and how those work. But the problem is that cancer, as you may know, cancer is the result of evolution. Every time a cell divides, those daughter cells could potentially have mutations. And if those mutations are in oncogenes, subsequent mutations pile up within the cell and create a unique fingerprint for that cancer. And in fact, every single cancer itself, every tumor is a vast menagerie of tumor genomes within it. And so having access to a tool that allows you to look at the specifics of that patient can save valuable time. Now, this other group, BioScribe, has a really mind-blowing technology, in my opinion. What they do is they take an entire tumor sample, they split it into individual cells, and they create they identify the genome of every single cell, its whole sample, individual cell sequencing. And with that data, what they're doing right now, what's happening right now, is drug companies are looking at various tumor samples, and they're able to identify within that sample, using BioScribe, they're able to identify therapeutic resistant alleles. That is individual, sometimes even one cell within that tumor that has a drug resistant profile. When you kill the rest of the tumor, that cell is left behind, and it is a seed that can then grow into another tumor that can be even deadlier than the last one and completely untreatable. And so if you can identify those in the beginning, and in addition to targeting the overall tumor, target those specific drug resistant genes with your therapy, then you can come up with drug therapies that are going to be more effective with dealing with heterogeneous tumors. And imagine what it's going to be like when this becomes a tool that is used not only for drug discovery, but for diagnosis, where the tumor from a patient can then be sent to the lab, and they can see exactly the profile of every single cell. Combine that with CellWorks technology, and you can predict what drugs are going to work best. And of course, combine that with the outcome of what BioScribe is doing right now, and you'll be able to see, we'll have an even greater distribution of therapeutic options. And so the future is really bright. Another thing that they're doing, this is still BioScribe, is they're doing, for those cells, they're doing entire transcriptome analysis per cell. And that blew my mind when they told me that. What that means is that for every cell in a sample, they're not just looking at the genetic profile by doing like PCR and so forth. They're actually able to see not just what genes are active, but how much those genes are being expressed. They can measure the quantity of all of the RNA in there, the small interfering RNA, the mRNA, and so forth. Just they can quantify all of that. And that lets them not only see like what the profile of the tumor is, but the surrounding tissue as well, which means that they can see how the tumor is modifying its microenvironment and how precancerous cells are changing to become cancer. And this is unlocking novel insights. So I'm going to change gears for a second and talk about mutation correction. This group, like last year, I had to start dealing with tRNA for the first time since grad school. Like it just hadn't gotten into my head, or hadn't come across my desk. But if you look at what tRNA is, it is the interlocutor between protein and mRNA. It is the translator that turns the genetic code into physical machinery. So with and essentially, if you so for example, there are 5,000 diseases have this one particular mutation, and what that mutation does is it turns an arginine codon right? The little three nucleotide code that the arginine tRNA, one of the arginine tRNA stick to, into a nonsense stop codon, which means that when the ribosome gets to that, it truncates the protein. This can lead to a poorly functional protein, a non-functional protein, possibly an aggregate. So you can make all kinds of bad things happen because of a single mutation. But what if you made a tRNA that just reads it, just reads that stop codon, and then puts an arginine in there? Then with a single therapeutic, 5,000 types of diseases are cured. And of course, to calculate this, AI was used. AI and machine learning are a huge part of all of this, all of these technologies. Like I said, these are the blooms. So the CellWorks is already in the wild, and BioScribe is in the wild doing what they're doing, and the RNA or the tRNA therapeutics are underway. It's entirely possible that elements of these things are going to fail. In fact, not just possible, very likely. Most biotechs go under in the first few years of life. But these are the blooms of what we can see in the future. This is not the first, this is not the last tRNA company. There are tons of AI companies that are doing really novel things, like discovering entirely new things. I'm going to talk just a little bit about them in a second. But first, I want to talk about how this stuff works. So we're going to talk about what a GAN is, a generative adversarial network. So what it is it's essentially two pieces of software. The first is a generator that generates noise patterns, like literally nothing but noise patterns. And it uses a random seed to do that. And then there's a discriminator, and the discriminator is a piece of learning software that is trained on patterns, and those patterns are in this case faces, photographs of real human faces. And what it does is the discriminator learns what a face looks like. Now, in the beginning of generating an image, the generator just sends raw noise, and the discriminator says, okay, I'm going to look for some noise that looks even the tiniest bit like a face, just a little bit like a face. And you can kind of see where it goes. I mean, like you can imagine how the discriminator kind of feels in this process. It's basically got pareidolia, for facial pareidolia, which is where it kind of sees faces where no face really is. I actually have a strong case of facial pareidolia, where if I look at like a pebbled ceiling or dappled shadows on the ground or something like that, I'll see all kinds of faces. What's weird is that they always have the same expression, and it usually isn't the same as my own mood. Anyway, sidetrack. So the discriminator picks a pattern of noise from that the generator has sent, that it says, you know what, there could be a face in here. And then the discriminator sends that back to the generator and says, refine that. And so the generator, it increases the resolution, the number of pixels, and it kind of builds out, it sends many different images and many different noises. And the discriminator picks the ones that kind of build out what it thinks a face might be. And it does this a few times. And then eventually you have something that really does kind of start to look like a face, like you could almost recognize that person. But it does this over and over again, and it makes an actual image that is indistinguishable from a face. This is a human being that does not exist. This image right here was generated by a StyleGAN, which is you can visit this website, thispersondoesnotexist.com, if you want to really scare people at parties. But the StyleGAN is just a generative adversarial network that generates faces. Now, the technology is kind of in its infancy still, I guess, because, honestly, I don't even know what's going on over here. I'm like, who's she with? But yeah, eventually StyleGAN will be able to not give us nightmares. So I want to talk a little bit about Generate Bio. They're one of my favorite clients that we've recently had. And what they're able to do is use machine learning to generate understandings of how components of proteins work within themselves, how the parts of the proteins interact and how they interact with biology. And they can take those pieces of information and use the machine learning algorithm to predict how any given protein structure is going to interact with itself and with others. And so they can design de novo, in the same way that this person does not exist design spaces. They can design proteins that have a very specific bias. They can make a protein that is going to bind to a specific thing, or they can make a protein that antibodies can't bind to, or they can make a protein that has 1,000% more effective enzymatic activity than its natural counterpart. Or another thing they can do is they can actually make backwards proteins out of trans amino acids that have specific functions that can't be broken down by cellular metabolism. So they can design these things from scratch, de novo, and then actually make them in the real world. And this is underway now. They came out of stealth about a year ago. So we are going to find out more from them. They're going to be doing some pretty amazing stuff. And then, of course, there's Just Evotech Bio, who has a machine learning algorithm that predicts, or that has trained on antibodies and is able to design antibodies from scratch that have very specific properties, including ease of manufacture. A major problem with antibodies when they're discovered just via cellular means is that you might have a B cell lineage that creates one particular antibody that does something amazing, but you can't manufacture it, because when you try to put that gene into E. coli and get a giant vat of it, you get these giant clumps of aggregates. And so they can actually, with their machine learning algorithm, they can optimize them for production, and essentially take what should be very expensive and time consuming to produce and make it cheap and easy and accessible. And then, of course, there's Ventus. And yeah, it's hard to, I love every one of these clients. Ventus may be my favorite. I don't know. What they can do is they can scan, protein, they predict protein structure, then they predict how water interacts with the surfaces of that structure. And then they predict how water interacts with druggable pockets within that structure. And when they can tell how water is sticking to or being repelled by the interior surfaces of those drug binding pockets, they can start to interrogate those drug binding pockets with actual drugs or compounds that already exist. And they can find the compounds that best get the end result in that protein that they're looking for. Then, of course, they have a recursive process where they test it in the wet lab, apply those apply those results and refine them to get to the drug that they're trying to build, or to get to the drug that has the effect that they want. But what we're seeing here is a extreme speed up of the drug discovery process, which used to be a shotgun method where they'd take a huge number of small molecules, and just test for years and years and years, and eventually find one that was ready to go to the FDA, and then probably it wouldn't pass. So what we're seeing is an exponential increase in medical advancement. And of course, if you have any doubt about whether or not this is the future, look at who is dumping, where the money is coming from. AlphaFold. Google has AlphaFold now, which is essentially predicting protein shapes based on diseases, or not diseases, based on genes. And unlike Generate Bio is making completely new proteins. AlphaFold, essentially, you can go to the AlphaFold website and type in a protein that hasn't been crystallized, and you can download a PDB of that protein, and it's highly accurate to the reality. And so that alone is going to change how at least my work functions, because a lot of times the proteins aren't crystallized, or only a fragment of the protein is crystallized. And AlphaFold is going to be able to, and other things like it are going to start to be able to give us full protein structures. where none exist. And then, of course, Facebook has their Meta AI, which they're making a metagenomic atlas, which is kind of doing the same thing as AlphaFold, except for what they're doing is they're trying to create a massive atlas of sorted and understood proteins in what they call the dark matter of biology, which is all of the genes, the massive reservoir of genes in the deep sea vents and in soil bacteria and just everywhere that are not the places where we're looking. And that's going to unlock insights into evolution and life itself. And of course, they also have Make a Video, which it's eventually going to get into public use. And that's going to change how we do things, as well as No Language Left Behind, which is a real-time translation software, which these kinds of tools haven't really quite become a major part of our life. But I mean, imagine having a Zoom call where it literally looks like that person is speaking normal vernacular of your first language, just like everything that they say, including their lip syncing. It looks like they're speaking, like if I'm talking to them, it looks like they're speaking English, and everything down to the intonations and like their actual timbre of voice and what their idioms mean. These are all the accurate use of idioms. These are all things that are coming, and it's going to open up communication in ways that, like, well, I mean, we can't predict. Like, that's just going to be amazing. We'll all speak every language at that point. And then, of course, there's Amazon, who has just recently announced that they are diving headlong into the AI drug discovery market as well. So much money. And this is basically the rocket fuel for the future. That's going to propel us into the future. And as I mentioned, AI is going to have tremendous impact on our careers, and it's already starting. You know, you saw these images. Actually, a few of them are from my previous AMI talk, but these are all generated by Midjourney, and hopefully everybody's aware of what Midjourney is right now, and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion. If you're not aware yet, and you are a visual artist of any kind, you will be, and honestly, you kind of must be, because what these tools are they're what Photoshop was. I remember when I graduated high school, I had gone to a special art high school where I had, developed my draftsmanship skills to an amazing level. I was a great painter for a 19 or 18-year-old. I had really become quite skilled, and Photoshop came out, and all of a sudden you could undo. You could only undo once, but you could erase, and you could manipulate pixels in a way that you couldn't do with actual photographs or real objects or real paint. And so all of a sudden, I found that very threatening, because it made it so that anybody could make art, and all the skill that I had built up was going to go by the wayside. It was a waste of time. But in actuality, that's not the case. Photoshop became central to how I create the imagery that I create. And then later on, 3D software has become just easier and easier to use. And so the barrier to entry for creating 3D animation is much lower. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how AI is already impacting that. But the fact is that we have to, as AI comes to dominate how we create images, we must embrace it. Otherwise, we will be the artist that simply can't keep up, because they're trying to do everything with actual airbrush rather than using the airbrush tool in Photoshop. And I have strong opinions about what constitutes art, right? So all of these images are beautiful. I don't feel like they're mine per se. But even though I curated their generation, I worked with the AI to create an image that met the criteria for what I wanted to do, and that AI was trained on many other artists' work, I would make the argument, and I'm happy to get into a long discussion after a beer or during with a beer over a beer at the AMI next year, but I contend that all of the art that I've ever made is the direct result of me being trained on other artists. And then the noise pattern of my personality and my specific goals, my own like mental prompt, leading to the end result. And yes, that was unique art that was produced by me using whatever tools, Photoshop, etc. So creating artwork in AI, I don't think that we should. I mean, like, we're just going to have to deal with the fact that AI is going to be creating a lot of artwork, and we can argue over whether or not that's right or wrong, but it's going to happen, and it doesn't matter. So a couple of tools that are out there right now are the this is I think, I can't remember if this is yeah, this is Meta AI. So this is the Facebook one. It can take a still image, look at how everything is moving in it, and it can make actual like video based on that image, using those images as a prompt. And like from an animation standpoint, I mean, it's gonna change how, like, it's gonna open up new avenues for how we can put things together. I mean, it's still in its infancy. You can see that like the dude's legs are all wobbly and it's kind of weird, but the fact that we have access to this kind of thing will make it make us able to create artwork in ways that we never have been before. Even if I take my own 3D image and have the AI do something with it, that's gonna give me new opportunities for how to do things. And of course, there's Imagine, Google's Imagine video. This is all AI generated video based on various prompts. And you can see my mouse kind of rolling over these guys to show you the prompts that led to them. And yeah, they're janky and weird, like that teddy bear running. That's a weird teddy bear. But like the fact that these that the AI can actually understand these things, like understand our prompt, know, and just kind of imagine what we're looking for. This is a bloom. It's the beginnings. It's ugly, and it's chunky and clunky, and people are going to be using it in goofy ways for a long time. But eventually, it's going to become a very serious tool that is part of our tool set. And I think there are a lot of scary features about this. Imagine Video is not publicly released yet, and the reason that they've said is because it can be right now they already have filters that prevent explicit or potentially harmful content from being produced, but they haven't figured out a way to completely get around it. Like there are still harmful biases that can be accidentally produced by this video software, and they have to figure out how to make it something that's not going to be harmful for society before they release it. And frankly, I think that that's absolutely beautiful that they're doing that. Stable Diffusion is not. So Stable Diffusion has landed hard. You can download it, install it on your own computer, train it on whatever images you want, and it will start to work. And you can even there is a free Stable Diffusion plugin. Stable Diffusion is free, by the way, but there's a free Stable Diffusion plugin for Blender. So you can make your scene and then have Stable Diffusion process it within Blender. And there's nothing for After Effects yet, and there's nothing for Cinema 4D yet, those are the two softwares that I want, but that's just a matter of time. That video these kinds of text prompt based filters are going to hit. I would be surprised if I don't have one by this time next year that I start to use, just to be interesting, to come up with interesting styles. We already use Midjourney for part of our ideation process to help identify visual metaphors and come up with strong aesthetics that can then guide our scientific animation. But it'll be neat once we can start building geometries out, because we have to always have everything accurate. That's the one trick. That's what's going to slow us down in how AI impacts our careers. It's going to slow down how quickly we can truly absorb or use AI exclusively, because it's going to be more difficult and less funded to make the AI produce highly accurate, highly accurate imagery with the kind of scientific rigor that our industry demands. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. It will happen, but it will happen as an afterthought, because animation was made for Hollywood, and we have commandeered it into our profession. And the same thing for AI is there. But there are tools that we can already use. Topaz Labs, it has software that we are already using in production right now. Their video enhanced AI. If you don't know what it is, by all means, look it up if you do video. And if you don't do video, look up Gigapixel. They have Topaz Labs has Gigapixel. What their software allows you to do is arbitrarily up-res and arbitrarily retime video, and arbitrarily up-res stills as well. Which means that when we produce video now, we don't bother rendering it in 1920 by 1080. We also use Neat Video, which I don't have a thing for here, but we have a tutorial on Vimeo, and you can always look out for me or email me at Cameron@Microverse Studios, and I'm happy to share all of the tutorials that we have on this with you. We're slowly uploading them to the website, but yeah. So when we produce our work, here's a great example of it. This is a 1 minute, what we call a chill shot, right? It's just zoom backgrounds or something like that. Just a slow thing happening in beautiful, in a beautiful environment that's designed to be beautiful. But the thing is that rendering a minute of 1920 by 1080 at high samples and it can be costly. We use cloud computing. We don't use local rendering. So, that can be costly. This would have cost probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 just to render the whole thing. But we rendered every fourth frame, and we rendered it at 1280 by 1020 or 1280 by 720, and we rendered it at low sample quality. So instead of $1,000, it cost us about 50. And so think about what that means for us, like for everyone, for all of us. It means that there's no upper limit to what kind of effects we can put into our 3D. Whenever I remember the hardest thing used to be that, like, yes, you wanted to use blurry refraction, you wanted to use caustics or atmospherics or whatever, but it was going to take too long to render. You have a deadline. You don't want to lock up your own local machine for 7 hours today. Or if you have a local farm, there's a bandwidth that it can operate at, and you can't make it render faster than that. But if we can start to use these tricks, we don't have to avoid blurry transparency. Like I had a scene once where we zoomed into a cell that had blurry transparency, and the last like 3 frames where the cell was in the full frame took an hour to render each. And no, I think it was like 3 hours to render each. It was staggering, and it was kind of expensive. And so, like, we made the policy, okay, no more than 25% of the screen can have blurry transparency at any given time. But with this now, with the samples all the way turned down, who cares? I just made a scene. I just made like a 3-minute animation where the walls were blurry transparency. There was nothing but blurry transparency everywhere, and it was fine. So that is the present, and the future is extremely exciting. So I'd love to field any questions. I really appreciate it. This is Midjourney, what it thinks our logo should look like.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Fascinating stuff. I'm blown away by what is becoming possible now. So we'll open it up to questions. I have a first one to get us started, maybe. So you talked about your own training in art, draftsmanship. Given what AI is capable of doing now and what it will be capable of doing in terms of producing visuals in almost any style, 2D, 3D, line art, fully rendered, graphic, whatever you have, whatever you can think of. Is it going to be necessary to train, do you think, in sort of more in the traditional ways, like you talked about the transition from airbrush to Photoshop, right? So will this become the same kind of, do we even need to learn Photoshop and how to draw all these things?
I always think that there will be room for advanced image manipulation, right? So the first part of your question is, can we just have the AI do everything? And I think the answer to that is yes. But I think that there will always be, in addition to curation, there's going to always be adjustment to make it exactly what you want. I mean, I guess there'll be like a brain interface or something like that eventually, where we can just be like, we just think about it and it'll happen. And then we won't need to train. But between now and then, especially with high skill professions, the Photoshop is always going to be incredibly valuable. All of the layout stuff that we do, Illustrator, etc. And I think that draftsmanship is, I think, less important, at least in the animation industry. It's less important than I think it used to be. It's more important to be able to create a beautiful end product than it is to be able to draw one, because we can always find somebody to draw the thing that you're going to then animate, right? And if the storyboard artist that's creating the visual plan for the animation, if that storyboard artist uses AI type tools to make it easier for them to produce it, then great. But I still think that they're going to need to have core skills that allow them to essentially communicate what's in their head. I mean, that's ultimately what the storyboarding phase is. And in illustration, if we're just doing illustration, even that is taking knowledge and information and processing it into something that is understandable. And right now, the AI is great for creating aesthetic, but it's not great for taking information and processing it into the perfect visual tool. That will happen. But when that happens, when I can say, and this is the result of me talking with Brandon Pletch this summer, but when I can say, AI, take my science, when I'm the CEO of a biotech company, I can say, AI, take my scientific message and turn it into a perfect animation. And the AI can do it on that same day. Actual Cameron, will be able to say, AI, make me a multi-billion-dollar biotech company, because it's the same degree of like magic that has to happen. And so and that's the singularity. Like that's also kind of going to happen. Like we'll be like biology, make it so that that I can have something that kills termites but doesn't harm the environment. Like, and the AI will be like, okay, and then it'll go do it, and then that's now a technology that's going to change human life, like just human experience.
I have to let it sit for a moment, that thought.
Yeah.
No, because like you, I teach at Iowa State, and I teach scientific illustration, and students who are hoping to go into the field, and I'm wondering what kind of skills do they need to, so really the core skills, I mean, there's value in being able to interpret, perceive the world around us, be able to communicate that through drawing, and then to take that with the visual storytelling component, like you're saying, the accuracy, the science, and the storytelling, to be able to create illustrations or animations that communicate well. But yes, it seems a little bit bleak from my point of view, but we have a question from the live audience over in Toronto. Please, Alex.
We have two questions actually. So first up, you got.
Hi, hello, Cameron. This is more two anecdotes. I heard about AI being used in art, but I want to share and how interesting it is. But there's actually a webtoon artist that I know, and they were able to use stable diffusion and use their own webtoon and art images as sort of the bin images, and it helps them generate concept art and like beginning illustrations for their webtoon really easily. So I think that's a really interesting thing, because we often think as AI being an opposition to artists, but as you said, it can be a very powerful tool. And in this case, it takes away like the ethical ambiguity of these programs being trained on art that is provided by artists, by using the artist's own art images as sort of the starting images to generate new images using like stable diffusion and AI. So I feel like that was super fascinating and could be relevant to art industry. I also found interesting video online that was about sort of using AI, and it was actually a girl who was untrained in art, and then her, I think, video editor, and they both used AI to generate images, and then they had people vote on which images they found most aesthetically pleasing, and in every case it was the video editor who had art backgrounds, images who are rated more highly. So I think it's really fascinating. It gives us sort of insight that even if these tools are made available to everyone, artists who have artist backgrounds and sort of this artistic vision can still use them to their fullest effect to create images. So I don't think AI tools will ever be fully in opposition to artists. They'll just help us make our vision faster and more effectively and like communicate it. So that was just my perspective. And I feel like it was really interesting if you could give your own perspective on how AI has shaped that for you and you're working at your studio. So yeah.
Absolutely. I have a short answer, but I think a complete one. AI gives us the opportunity to be our best selves, right, from an artistic standpoint. So when I use the AI software to kind of come up with inspiration, what I'm doing is I'm starting by consuming artwork, and it's consuming a blend of artwork from other artists that has been curated by the AI to create something that is more in the realm of what I'm already thinking about. But I think that what it's going to end up doing is what I do is I curate that into what I want, what is like perfect to me. And it concentrates my own artistic vision and makes, in my opinion, it makes my artwork more my artwork. Like it makes it more like a better version of what it could have been. And what I've seen is that folks that have been incorporating AI into their process, their stuff hasn't changed fundamentally. The difference in style between their style and my style or other artists is still strong, but it's more concentrated. It's like it made them more them. So I think that is, I think that that's kind of beautiful. And I lament the fact that that because it's training these people on other people's artwork, that there's because it's training on other people's artwork, there is a question about like, you know, isn't this their artwork? You know, is it like in the style of Van Gogh? Isn't that Van Gogh? Like, isn't that because of Van Gogh? And like, where does the credit lie in that? And that is a very tricky ethical question I cannot answer. All I can say is I really like Beeple's work and I don't ever give him credit, and I feel kind of bad about that.
A bit beyond, oh, can I talk?
Yeah.
All right. This might be a bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but I was encouraged to ask this question anyway, because your presentation made my heart pound. Are you worried about these molecular AI generators being funded by some of the world's largest mega corporations and what that implies for economic class separation and accessibility to life-saving technologies? And what is our role as science communicators in the face of this growing correlation to wealth and advanced access to healthcare?
I think the first person to live forever will be incredibly rich. That person will have a vested interest in the earth not turning into a cesspit, right? That person, like that class, the incredibly rich, and this is one thought experiment that I've actually thought about, one possible future, and it's beyond the singularity, so I don't know, but it could be that the ultra rich start to live forever, kind of probably will be, and then they'll care about the planet, and then if they start to live forever, they're gonna have to either protect themselves from everybody else or protect everybody else from you know, bad things too, because they will see that as the human population, as a human race becomes unbalanced, there's threat, and when you live forever, that's a lot to live for, you know, that's a lot to lose. So I think that there's sort of I mean, I do think that there is a problem with the class separation in access. There's already a problem with class separation in access to life-saving medicines in the United States. Like it's mind-blowing to me that that being poor can be a death sentence. It's absolutely terrible, and that struggle is going to remain with us. even if in 10 years time we find a cure for cancer, that struggle, that class struggle, is going to remain with us for at least another generation, I think, just because of the mindset of the United States people, and like how sloppy and uncoordinated our governing system is and our society is. I have important opinions about that as well, that the sloppy and uncoordinatedness of it actually is a stabilizing force in our otherwise very heterogeneous set of cultures and ways of thinking. So which is why change has to happen slowly. But as I do believe, though, that the wealthy will end up, they already do end up carrying the poor a little bit. There was a Jon Stewart bit where he quoted some politician, and the politician was saying, you can already go to the hospital and they have to treat you, and to which Jon Stewart said, yes, and then you will be saddled with debt that you have for the rest of your life. And saying that is a reason not to have, socialized healthcare is like saying, why make everybody have some food when you can just go to a restaurant and eat and then run out? Like, that's not a solution. That everybody ends up paying for that anyway. If we organize how we're doing it, then everybody can have access without it being even more expensive. And in the United States, the healthcare system is this spiraling, like, dumpster fire of nonsense, where like hospitals have to charge more and more and more and more in order to pay, and in order to support the doctors who are getting malpractice suits, who have to get paid a lot to stay in business. And then health insurance companies have to pay more to the hospitals, so they charge people more, and just this whole endless cycle leads to, like, has led to my own health insurance bill being higher than my mortgage. And I am not alone. Like, the health insurance is becoming a big question mark in a lot of people's lives here. And I feel like that's a problem that is going to have a breaking point. And that breaking point is going to lead to a lot of solutions. From a global perspective, I mean, that's hard to say. I do know that there is, so the big, huge companies, like Google and Amazon and so forth, their utility function is to make money. And poor people have money. So if they're creating something that fills a need, and they will maximize the amount of money that they can make on that solution. And it will not be like, and even the ultra wealthy, they want to keep it for themselves. They're dealing with essentially the very first type of AI that humanity ever invented, which is the corporation. The corporation is a sociopathic entity. And I say that in an analytical way, not to be critical, because I own a corporation, right? But the fact is that a corporation has all of the parts of its thought divided amongst individuals, that each individual is or sets of individuals are responsible for one task. You've got accounting, you've got the CEO, who is responsible to the shareholders. And the whole point of the entire corporate apparatus is to maximize the inflow of money and the outflow of money to the shareholders. That's it. And so a company like mine, it's very small, can, because most of those functions are carried out in my head, my own morality gets put onto it. So my animators have a pretty nice life. But as my brother once put it, there is a red "make your employees miserable and make much more money" button on my desk that I could press at any time, and there's nothing to keep me from doing that. And I think that feature of corporations makes it so that nobody can tell them to stop making money. Like, we have to legislate stuff to make that the case. And I think that in this one case, they're going to want to make money off of poor people, and I think that is going to be kind of the leakiness of the system that makes it so that it's not going to be a total sci-fi dystopian future. That was a super long answer. I'm really sorry. I thought I was going to be shorter.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us so much to think about. I think we can squeeze in one last question from Geneviève, and then we'll have to move on to our next speaker for time. Go ahead, Geneviève.
Hi, so my partner here has a question. This is Jo.
Hi, Cameron. I'm a historian of science, and I work with AI developers partly at the University of Toronto. I found your presentation and the animations you presented quite dazzling, quite literally so at times, and I can see the enthusiasm as well you're experiencing as you're working with those. The question I had concerns the unintended effects that a visual representation of something as dazzling, again, as a protein folding or the mechanism of RNA replications, or the unintended effect of representing these images in almost a science fiction-y environment, right? There's an element here that is meant to explain, to visualize, but there's more than that. There's a rhetoric of excitement around these works. I think the decision made by the artist having say more than merely what is going on in that particular process. It textures it in some way. And so, do you think about that when you're working in your studio? Isn't there an element here also of promoting the enthusiasm, right? Insofar as you work with a company that goes beyond a mere explanation of what goes on. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. We really actually just encountered that particular consideration with a client that we're working with right now. They told us to dial it down because they were worried that there was going to be so much sauce that it was going to bury the actual scientific validity of their message. But I will say that the razzle dazzle is designed with the intent of triggering specific attention reflexes. And we use it for mechanism of disease animations. We're explaining how a disease operates. We also definitely do when we're talking about a bespoke technology for a client. I guess the unintended consequences of it would be that now we never overpromise, or rather it's illegal to overpromise like life-saving functionality where there is none. But I guess the potential could be that people take seriously a technology that is underdeveloped. However, I do think that most of those unintended consequences are going to be financial for investors rather than like impacting the world. At least as far as negative ones go. The positive ones would be that a company with a nice bloom that has the seeds of a technology that is going to change the world, and they have enough razzle dazzle to get people to pay attention and absorb the message and actually consider it. That's the goal. And then the influx of investment into that technology allows them to turn that bloom into all of the tools that it has potential to be. By and large, though, usually don't make it so pretty isn't a comment we get from our clients. Although I have had clients say, that's too bright, it's hurting my eyes, when it's just a little patch of white on the screen that I've put a lens flare on, and they're like, ow. Like, so I do get those kinds of unintended consequences. I'm sorry, I feel like there's a much better answer for your question out there, and I don't think I can really measure up to it. That's such a deep and thoughtful question to ask.
No, thank you.
In our classes, we do talk about the messaging and creating visual science communication pieces that inform and we can sometimes forget about the element of delighting an audience or entertaining them. So, but clearly there's a fine balance to be had there. So thank you for all those really insightful responses, for your talk. Super fascinating topic, and looking forward to seeing how your work and the field of AI in art and science evolves. So thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Cam.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.